works again. It's such a tease. Okay, so let's see here. Procedurally, how we're doing? You guys, your homework, I think I'm getting it right this time. It's actually due this coming Monday. Okay. How many of us have started, just out of curiosity? How many of us plan to start the homework at some point in the coming week? Yeah, some of us do the homework of hard knocks, and that doesn't really work.
This course is made by to-do list.
Okay, cool. Good. Yeah, you guys should start, because I'm told that it's hard. I'm sorry, it's hard to calibrate these things, but I try. But I think actually, the reason why you guys feel it's hard is because I put the hardest question is the very first one. So should you be stuck on that, my advice is to, kind of like certain exams like the SAT, not the SAT, but certain ones they say like, continue reading as if you answered part one. Like I would recommend you just do that, because the rest of it actually shouldn't be so bad. Has anybody started the coding part? I'm nervous that somebody's going to start and then we're going to find bugs. No? Okay, well, Godspeed. It worked for me. I did it, so there's at least one of us here. Okay, good, so that's that. Your last remaining deliverables for your project are, like your project. So there's some of you guys I see really regularly, some of you I haven't heard from at all, and some of you expressed concerns in your check-ins and then you didn't follow up. Those of you in particular should know you're going to be in trouble if I don't see good progress on your final project, because you were warned. But really, I'm here to help you guys, right? So I have office hours. If the office hours don't work for you, contact me. We can schedule another time. Essentially, you have the advantage. You have a scatterbrained new faculty professor who's trying really hard to put together a class at the last second. But the flip side of that is that he also is really excited to help you guys actually do what you're doing. So you should leverage that and actually contact me if you're stuck, and I'll probably find a way to help. Cool? That's going to be our agreement? Excellent. Okay. Any questions about your project, your homework, any ongoing stuff? I think that's about it. We're pretty low on remaining stuff, which is nice. Okay. Excellent. Well then, where we left off, remember we were talking about clustering, right? And kind of approaching clustering with using a geometric picture in mind, right? And so we talked about, we started our lecture by talking about k-means, and the reason that we kind of like k-means is not just that it's sort of the vanilla clustering algorithm that everybody knows and loves in computer science, but also k-means is extendable to basically any metric space, right? And so we define this idea of what people call a Fréchet or a Karcher mean, which is somehow an average in a metric space, and this shows up all over the place. It shows up in this context, it shows up in medical imaging, it shows up in machine learning. Everybody loves Fréchet means. Sounds a very intuitive extension of things that we like. An interesting question I'll let you guys go home and ponder a little bit is, okay, well we talked about mean, what does it mean to have covariance in a weird metric space? And that turns out to be an even trickier problem. But that aside, for certain problems, we also talked about, well, k-means is nice, but it really has no notion of optimality. And remember, in fact, even on the plane, if you want to optimize that k-means objective that we wrote down to global optimality, this is an NP-hard problem. Right? We don't expect to do well. At least I don't expect to do well. Maybe Danielle and Matt can do better. But so far, at least those of us who've been in computer science a while are pretty convinced that that's somehow a class of typical things. Yeah. And so the question that we set out to ask was, can we ever do better? Like, can we come up with some notion of optimality, even if it's not exactly the notion of optimality that we want for clustering, and at least show that we can come up with an algorithm that is optimal for that notion of optimality? Notice I feel like I'm giving a very political explanation when I say that, and the reason is that really clustering is fundamentally a hard problem, like with a capital H. But somehow what we did is we said, okay, well, if we're willing to relax our problem, in particular, we talked about this normalized cut algorithm, right, where somehow you want to find a cut of your data, where you think of it as a graph and you have edges that measure how similar two data points are. You want to find a cut that somehow separates out things that are dissimilar, right, that have a low similarity score. We said, okay, that's an NP-hard problem, but after we did a lot of our algebra, we reduced it to this problem plus a binary constraint. And then we said, well, if we remove the binary constraint, okay, it's no longer the same problem we wanted to solve, but we can solve that thing to global optimality. So at the very least, we know that this normalized cuts algorithm doesn't depend on your initial guess, which is kind of a nice feature to have. Yep. Okay. So, great. So the very last step that we missed was we got all the way to this optimization problem, and then I didn't tell you how to solve it, right? And hopefully you guys have seen before some variation of a problem like the one that I'm showing you on the screen. Does anybody know what the objective function of this thing is called? It shows up all over the place in linear algebra. It's kind of a generalized version of a Rayleigh quotient, right? This is a quotient of two quadratic functions that are homogeneous in quadratic, right? They don't have any linear constant. Okay, so right, so our last task here is just to double check that we can actually solve this problem, and thankfully that's not such a difficult thing to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is write down an equivalent optimization problem to the one here. That somehow, anytime that you're doing numerical optimization stuff and you see division, you should like be exploding until you can get rid of the division. Like quotients are never a good thing to work with, right? Because you can do crazy stuff like divide by 0. And thankfully, in this particular problem, what do you notice? Let's say that I take x that solves this problem and I scale it by 17. Yeah. Then what you notice is, well, x still satisfies the constraint, right? The constraint is linear and the right-hand side is 0. And, in fact, the objective value didn't even change, right? Because it's the ratio of two things that I scaled the same. So what does that mean? It means that I effectively, I can restrict the scale of our unknown x, right? So I can give you what I claim is an equivalent to the optimization problem on the screen there. And that's to say, transpose, oh, it's getting this backward. L, X, subject to, I always thought that ST was such that, but that was the #1 negative review of the first draft of my textbook. Apparently it's subject to, and somebody was very upset about it. Anyway, oops. Equals 0, so this is kind of like our original problem, and I'm going to add a constraint that, just kidding, that this equals 1. Right? So what I did is I took the denominator and I added it to a constraint. Why could I do that? Well, I could take an x, so first of all, any x that's non-zero will have non-zero value of x transpose dx, right? Because d is just a diagonal matrix of non-zero numbers. So let's say I took an x that solved this problem. I could take that x and just scale it to satisfy this constraint, and I argued I can scale x any way that I want, and it's still optimal for this thing, right? That the scaling doesn't matter. So in particular, I'm going to choose the x for which this scale is true. And then the nice thing is that I got rid of the denominator. You see this nice little magic trick that I just did? Okay. So, right. So now we have to actually talk about how to solve this problem. And what I claim is that we can actually ignore this first constraint. So we're gonna come back to that in a second. I'm going to give you the optimality conditions for this problem, ignoring this constraint, and then we're going to see that we can kind of get that free. Okay? So, right. So at the end of the day, we want to minimize x transpose Lx such that x transpose dx equals 1. All right, what did I do wrong?
Do we have to, like, do we need any assumptions about d being like positive definite?
Yeah, remember that d is the diagonal matrix of valences.
Right. So
Yeah. Sorry, that was very enthusiastic. Fun. Good. Okay. I need more enthusiasm in this class. You know, I can't be the only one, and I have Tom here telling me I should be less enthusiastic.
No.
It's killing me. All right. So let's write down the Lagrange multiplier problem for this guy. For fun, I'm going to put a 1/2 in front of things that kind of look quadratic. Maybe I'll leave that. Just because I kind of know that I'm going to get a 1/2 that comes out, but you know, and I can certainly do that without changing it. Okay. So, well, how do we solve constraint optimization problems? Remember back to lecture 2 in this class. There's our favorite trick from calculus. It's called Lagrange multipliers. Yeah? And in this case, this is really the classic version of Lagrange multipliers. I have an equality constraint, and there's only one of them, right? So at the end of the day, what do? Well, because I'm pedantic, I usually write my multiplier function first and then differentiate it. So I have my Lagrange multiplier is, you know, it's a function of two things, right? The primal and dual variable. Actually, I think we don't typically use that language in this class. So the unknown and Lagrange multiplier, yeah? And we have 1/2 x transpose Lx plus, and let me choose a sign so that this works out the way I want it to. Lambda times 1 minus 1/2 x transpose dx. Yeah? Okay. And so you see this is a typical Lagrange multiplier thing. You have the objective function, lambda constraints. Yeah? And then what do? I say that if I want to solve this constraint problem, then it's a critical point of this multiplier function with respect to both variables. Yeah? So with respect to lambda, we already knew that, right? This is just saying x transpose dx equals 1, or 1/2 that. So now I have to differentiate with respect to x. And thankfully, remember from our construction of whatever the hell it is we're doing, normalized cuts, that all of our matrices are symmetric. Remember, L is the Laplacian, D is diagonal. Yeah, so when I differentiate both sides with respect to x, right, what do I get? Well, I get Lx minus lambda times dx. Yeah, and this equals 0 because I took the derivative. Yeah. And so in other words, I get our favorite expression, which is Lx equals lambda times dx, or equivalently, if you like, d inverse Lx equals lambda x. So, what does this tell me about a problem? How do I solve it? What is this? Eigenvalue problem. In particular, which eigenvalue do you want? Right? I mean, this thing has a lot of eigenvalues, right? And n of them. Well, it turns out this is a minimization problem. If essentially you plug this expression back into the objective, you'll see that you want the smallest eigenvalue. Yeah? But I cheated a little bit because I skipped this first constraint. In reality, what eigenvalue do I want of this matrix? The second smallest one. And do you guys see why? What is the smallest eigenvalue of the Laplacian? You remember this? We've done this in a lot of different forms now. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of hand gestures. You guys are right. It's 0, right? Because the constant functions are in the null space of the Laplacian, in the Laplacian positive definite. Or negative definite, depending on my mood. But here's positive. And, right, so well, what happens if I compute the smallest eigenvector of this problem? Then I get exactly this constraint here. See, this is the constant vector. So then if I work orthogonally to this thing, then I want the second smallest eigenvalue of this matrix, and that's also normalized cuts. Incidentally, you know how, like, in this class we keep having the same themes? This is yet another example where this happens. Like, in finite elements, we had a mass matrix, and then we had a cotangent Laplacian, and then in discrete exterior calculus, we had star, and then d star d. Or, crap, did I do it backward? No, that's fine. Okay, so here, look what happened. We have a d, and then a Laplacian. Yeah, and somehow it's exactly the same. D is somehow serving as our form of mass matrix, right? Like it's giving us some notion of norm. Like it's saying the norm of x equals 1. So this stuff is somewhat unavoidable. And this is kind of nice because this is a good theme in almost any geometric algorithm. If you have a Laplacian like matrix and you don't have a mass matrix, you probably made a math mistake. So it's kind of nice to see that somehow, no matter what you do, all roads lead to Rome. But the takeaway here is that if I want to solve this normalized cuts problem after I get rid of that binary constraint, remember the way that we set it up, we also have this kind of funky constraint on the top here that we relaxed. But after we're relaxing it, we can solve that problem to global optimality because we know how to compute eigenvectors. So at the very least, I can't say that I have a globally optimal clustering algorithm. You can come up with a certificate that kind of after the fact checks if it is or not. But you can at least say that it's optimal for the problem you wrote down, which is better than you can do for k-means. Yeah, so it's somehow a little bit of a new starter. And so here's an example. Here we've done normalized cuts on a graph, so the similarity is equal to 1 if there's an edge and 0 if there isn't. It's kind of the most basic notion of similarity. And you can see, I don't know if you guys can see on the screen here, the red and blue ones. It essentially cuts exactly where you would expect, which is along this edge right here. Yeah? So just like we mentioned, you know, I got nervous at the end of the lecture and started just spouting out things. This algorithm really is meant for 2 clusters, and the obvious question here is how do I extend to more than 2? The first answer I'll give you is sometimes you don't want to, you know. Like for example, like if my job is separating an image like foreground and background, then 2 clusters is more than enough. In fact, it's not more than enough, it's exactly enough. I can give you a globally optimal algorithm for one cluster. Anyway, right, so otherwise we have to figure out what to do, right? So people have proposed all sorts of things, and then all of a sudden it becomes heuristic again, right? So, for example, you could cluster into 2, then cluster those 2 things into 2, then cluster those 4 things into 2, and then cluster those 8 things, whatever. And that's called recursive bipartitioning. But you should notice that that's greedy, right? Because I made that initial cut, and then I never looked back. Yeah, so it's very difficult to prove anything about that. Something that you can prove a little bit more is to say, well, somehow clustering has to do with eigenvalues, eigenvectors of this matrix, like this matrix is important. So maybe what I'll do is use this Laplacian matrix to make things like heat kernel descriptors, like what we've already talked about, and then cluster those using k-means. And it turns out, actually, that is not an entirely unintelligent thing to do. Yeah. In a sense, you can think of the algorithm for 2 clusters as sort of already doing that, where you do 2 means, right? You separate positive and negative. I don't know. Right. And of course, just to remember, we actually already have a name for the second largest eigenvector of the Laplacian. This thing is called the Fiedler vector. It has all kinds of nice properties, right? So essentially, whenever you compute the first eigenvector of the Laplacian is just constant, so you always talk about the second. And the second has this nice property that it somehow just goes from small to big with very few local maxima, in fact 0 local maxima. And so it tends to have this nice structure like what I've shown you on this barbell, that somehow it clusters into 2 totally natural pieces geometrically. In fact, this plays out geometrically for a lot of reasons. One of the really fun things about being in this area is that, like, for a little while you'll work on like 3D shapes, and then you'll step over and play with graphs, and then maybe you'll play with high-dimensional data for a little while, and then you realize, like, oh, I have this nice algorithm, maybe now I'll go back to 3D shapes again. And people have done that. So for instance, if I want to cluster points on a surface, what Martin and colleagues realized is that one very easy way to do that is simply to look at the sign of the Laplacian eigenfunctions. Right? The kind of interesting thing that happens here, remember we have this Laplace Beltrami operator on a surface, and I can compute its eigenfunctions. And as I go to higher and higher eigenvalues, they become more and more oscillatory. Remember that was one of our many interpretations of this operator. And what happens as you oscillate more and more? Well, you effectively get more and more pieces that are individually positive and negative inside of the eigenfunction. Right? I mean, think about eigenfunctions as just the Laplacian on a line, right? So the first one has one big positive low, then there's 2, then there's 3, and so on. Yeah. So somehow, if you want to cluster into like 10 pieces, maybe what you do is you choose the 11th eigenfunction, and you just take the positive and negative parts as individual pieces of your clustering. And in fact, that's exactly what he's done here. And you can see they actually, kind of surprisingly, align kind of roughly with geometric stuff. The intuition being here that somehow Laplacian knows something about your geometry. That's purposefully vague because I don't think you can prove a whole lot about this particular clustering technique, but it's kind of nice that you can do it. It's very simple, right? You just find positive and negative and you're done. Does anybody know what these different regions on this unit are called? They have a special name. And there's a whole branch of mathematics, unsurprisingly. Maybe, with respect to almost any formula you write down in this class, there's like some mathematician that's dedicated a career to like studying it. This is one of those. So these are called nodal domains. And they correspond to regions in which a Laplacian eigenfunction is positive and negative. So effectively, a fancy way of describing the algorithm that I just showed you on the previous slide is that it divides a surface into nodal domains. It's a segmentation technique. Yeah. And the nice thing is, okay, the mathematics of understanding nodal domains is ridiculously hard. It dates back to Courant, whose name you might recognize because it's all over the side of the math department at NYU. But as computer scientists, we can just happily walk in and take all Courant's fancy math and essentially just call MATLAB's eigenvalue function and we're done. Yeah? So the very, very famous theorem in this area, does anybody have any conjecture for the name of the theorem? It's Courant's theorem. It tells you that the kth Laplacian eigenfunction has at most k nodal domains, which is somehow exactly the fact that you want for a segmentation technique like this. Right? If I want 10 pieces on my surface, the easiest thing to do is compute the 10th or 11th, depending on whether you start counting at 0 or 1, eigenfunction and just divide the positive and negative. And in fact, the geometry of these nodal domains can be pretty nice. which is surprising. And then there's all kinds of nice mathematics dedicated to like showing that these roughly partition your surface into equal surface area pieces, roughly. If you're really slick, you can notice this is actually a bad example. But if you look at the 3D humans here, you can see they tend to meet up in kind of a square, like a checkerboard-like pattern. Right? That's certainly true for Fourier, like think about Fourier on the plane. And that's not a mistake, that you can kind of show that they tend to make right angles when they meet and meet with degree 4. So anyway, there are all kinds of nice theorems about nodal domains. And it's one of these areas that, like, if you're ever bored and just want like a rabbit's hole of mathematics on Wikipedia, it's a good starting point. Right, so to conclude some of our discussion here on segmentation and clustering, I want to point out that a lot of these algorithms really are just terrible. And they're terrible for a lot of reasons. One of which I keep kind of harping on is that they tend to be only locally optimal, like they really depend on your initial guess. But there's another more subtle one, which is a little more specific to geometry. So, you know, typical, like, so for example, let's say that I'm in medical imaging, and what I want to do is I have a bunch of brains and I want to label the folds. Right? Well, all of the algorithms that I've talked about operate on like one brain at a time and just find kind of interesting geometric features and cluster them together, right? But what they don't do is guarantee anything about the relationship between the clustering on brain A and the clustering on brain B. Yeah? And that's actually a big problem. That typically, you know, algorithms like, for example, randomized cuts, remember from last time, you know, if you give them 3 different humans, they might give you 3 very different, but kind of legitimate clustering. Yeah? And so an interesting question is, like, what do we do about that? Like, can we somehow improve our clustering so at the very least you get the same thing on different models that somehow are drawn from the same class, like different humans or different brains, whatever. If you step back even farther, one way to understand this is you could ask the question of, like, is segmentation just a purely geometric problem? Right? And we touched on this at the very beginning of our last lecture, right? Like, if I give you an algorithm and it says it takes as input a 3D model and gives you a segmentation with a capital S, you should immediately take that paper and light it on fire and throw it in your trash can afterwards, right? And the reason for that is that segmentation is not like an end, right? It's a means to some other, right? Typically, you take your data, you segment it, and then you do something with those segments. Right? You use it to understand your data set, or you use it to understand the folds of your brain, or whatever. And there's no reason why there has to be some globally correct segmentation technique, right? So as we mentioned before, the obvious counterexample here is the brain, right? The folds here have meaning, right? And not just like geometric meaning, like curvature, but like function, you know? And there's no reason why your geometric algorithm should be aware of that. Cool? Hopefully, I've repeated this enough times to really try to help. That if you write segmentation papers, they're very popular in the early 2000s, then you're doing it wrong, unless you have an application. Okay, so what's the obvious way out here? Well, what's very popular right now in computer science, you know, is if I don't know how to answer a problem, then I download a giant data set of examples that I like, and I use that to guide my algorithm. Right? I do big data on it. And this is a great example where I think it really makes sense. Yeah, that like, okay, you know, as a person with a PhD in math, if you put that brain in front of me and ask me what the segments are, I have no idea. I think one of them is the corpus callosum, but I don't even remember what it is. That's in the back, right? I don't know. You know, you could easily put a clinician in front of a bunch of brains and ask them to label a lot, and they might not understand a whole lot about curvature, but they can give you the data that you need to infer labelings on other brains. Yeah? And this makes complete sense for this clustering problem. In other words, you might view it as what we call supervised learning, right? So like somebody takes 100 teddy bears and labels the arms, the legs, the belly, and the head, and the ears, and now for teddy bears 101 to 500, I now have a reasonable way of finding the segments that I'm looking for. And notice, as an added bonus, for example, of this technique that I've mentioned here, not only do you get the segments come with names, right? Like they have face, hair, and neck, yeah? And so this is the supervised learning for segmentation is totally a reasonable thing to do. And in fact, the world expert on this, who I think, yeah, is the first author of this paper, will be giving a talk in the graphics group tomorrow if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Right, so the original paper that proposed segmentation from supervised data is actually, it's surprisingly recent. It's in 2010. And the way that they did it was using machinery known as a conditional random field, CRF. It's not our job in this class to tell you all of the background of the CRFs, because that could easily fill a class, but very roughly from an optimization perspective, it's easy to see what's going on. What they want to do is come up with a descriptor, or rather a label for every point on your surface, and they have a couple, they have some kind of reasonable ansatz about what they want this labeling to have, right? Namely, if you have two adjacent vertices on your triangle mesh, then you should pay extra money if they don't get the same label. In other words, you want the label to be kind of contiguous along the surface. The language of conditional random fields, this is a binary term. Yeah. And then, let's say, okay, maybe I don't know what descriptors are relevant for my task, but I'm really good at computing geometric descriptors, right? I mean, we essentially dedicated 3 weeks of this class to that, yeah? So we can compute curvature, and the heat kernel signature, and the wave kernel signature, and I don't know, the shape diameter function, and whatever it is that brain people use, and like every possible, thing that I can write down about a point on a surface to describe its geometry. And I can say, okay, I'm just going to put that in a giant pit. And my job is to learn the weighting on that description function that says, given this list of descriptors, most likely my label is that, right? And that will differ for different geometry tasks. Again, like labeling the source is going to be quite different from labeling the parent. So I pose it as a learning problem. I say, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to train, given a bunch of labeled meshes where somebody has painstakingly labeled arms and legs and heads and toes and heads and shoulders and toes, I can go back and figure out what makes sense for inferring a labeling, right? And then at the end of the day, I just solve an optimization problem that says, find the most likely label that has a unary term so that like my descriptor tends to agree with other descriptors of legs or whatever. And so that adjacent points get similar labels. Yeah? So I'll refer you to their paper for details. The implementation, as with a lot of these CRF things, gets a little messy. But the basic high-level story makes a lot of sense, right? You essentially, rather than just kind of clustering all of your descriptors just ahead of time, you learn which descriptors are relevant to your problem and add a little bit of assumption that it should be a smooth labeling on your surface. Yeah. Before somebody asks, so this is a CRF, and those are out these days. So obviously, the next thing we should do is use a deep network for that. And indeed, just this year at CVPR, there's a convolutional neural network to solve mesh segmentation tests as well. We're not going to come. And finally, the last thing that we're going to mention now, and I actually just posted slides this morning that hopefully we'll get to in this class toward the end, is for every supervised learning problem, there's an unsupervised learning problem out there, where unsupervised learning says, okay, maybe I don't have a clinician that's qualified to label every fold on every brain, and I don't expect them, I don't pay them enough to sit there and have them label the hundreds of thousands of brains that I need in order to really train a reliable machine learning system. But I can stick people, I can stick grad students in the MRI all day, and what comes out is a whole database of 3D shapes. I just don't know anything about them, right? But at least what I know is that the shapes have some kind of shared structure. Yeah? And so this corresponds to an unsupervised learning problem that says, okay, well maybe I can't come up with a segmentation and say that this is the leg and the head and the eyes or whatever, but I can at least be pretty confident that this segment, whatever it is the same segment on Danielle, the same one on Matt, the same one on Ryan. That essentially by having a large collection of models that I segment all at the same time, I should do better than just segmenting one guy in a vacuum. Yeah? And so, anyway, this is just something to keep in mind. We're going to put the basic reference here, and right toward the end of this class, we're going to talk about consistent segmentation and consistent correspondence between different surfaces. And I think actually this makes a lot of sense for a lot of different types of data sets. And this idea really originally appeared in graphics, and I don't think has permeated a lot of the literature outside of graphics, but it's a really easy low-hanging fruit for doing other areas, architecture, medical imaging, and so on. Anyway, so that kind of wraps up our discussion from last time, and continuing our kind of funny traversal of half a lecture at a time here. We'll move on to our next topic here, which is closely related. Remember that sort of the theme of the end of this class is what to do when you have more than one piece of geometry. And apparently that is have your projection. Okay. And so our original version of this is like more than one piece of geometry on the same shape. So I'm going to take the shape and partition it into pieces. And finally, for my last trick in this class, we'll talk about multiple shapes. In particular, just like I mentioned at the end of the segmentation problem, you expect to do better in segmentation with the more surfaces that you have. But the algorithms that we've talked about so far haven't really leveraged that. Right? So our next and probably final goal in this class, depending on timing, will be, what do we do when I start walking around this data center with a 3D scanner and I just collect all the objects around me? Then somehow I should be able to do better in terms of my automatic understanding of any individual shape, because I understand the type of shape or the class of objects that I tend to see, right? And then I can do inference on the whole collection at a time. And so that's really our goal here. So the most basic version of this is the kind of extrinsic registration rigid problem, where essentially I'm given two different scans of what I assume is the same object. So the very famous example of this is the Stanford bunny. I think if you go to the Computer History Museum in San Jose, you can go see it for yourself. Yeah, I think I made a pilgrimage at some point. And essentially the Stanford bunny was chosen because it was like, if you look at it, it's like the most boring piece of lawn furniture ever. And in particular, it's like this nice kind of dusty terracotta that you can essentially take a photo of and infer from shading the depth, which is usually very challenging for like shiny objects. But anyway, it was one of the very first 3D scans of something, but there's a problem with 3D scanning equipment, which is that, and that includes, the Kinect, it includes whatever, like probably giant hunk of machinery they put in front of the Stanford bunny. It also includes your eyes, which is they only see one side of something at a time. Yeah, and in other words, there's occlusion. Yeah, and this is a big issue, because what it means is that if I want the whole bunny, what am I going to have to do? I'm going to put him on my favorite record player and have him spin around in front of the camera, or spin my camera around in front of the static bunny, or both, I suppose. And then, what do I get? I get a bunch of scans of the same object, and my job is to put them together. Yeah? In other words, to align them. Yeah? And so typically, well, what happens? Well, maybe I move my camera, I see two slightly different angles on this bunny. Well, from the camera's perspective, these are like totally different bunnies, right? There's the red guy and the blue guy, and they're not aligned at all. And our job is to come up with an algorithm that puts them in the same coordinate space. This is the simplest version of correspondence between surfaces. And then next time we'll talk about non-rigid correspondence. So like, I want to, map a horse to a giraffe, and so I can't rigidly align them because it's not going to work. They have just different structure, but somehow there's some geometric features that are in common. Yeah. In fact, there's one really weird paper that maps a horse to a giraffe to two grad students kind of on all fours crawling around, and then they use this to direct a 3D model of a giraffe walking, so they kind of walk and the giraffe walks. Anyway, I'm not sure it's the most practical algorithm, but it was kind of fun to watch. I should be sure to acknowledge that essentially a lot of the topics in the very end of this class are not classical. There's some research ideas. This one actually dates back for a while, but because of that I'll be lifting some slides from sort of people's research paper projects, presentations, and that kind of stuff. Okay. So our job of registration, which conveniently, we have a nice slick animation here, is to take, at the very least, two overlapping objects and just make them align. Right? And so typically the way that we do this is maybe, I ask a human to put them in roughly the same coordinate system, or maybe I can do that by computing a bunch of geometric descriptors and just kind of aligning them, and then I want to fine-tune that so they align just as well as possible. Yeah? And this is an algorithm that dates back basically as long as cameras, right? Because people really care about putting stuff in the same coordinate system. It's not hard to justify. Yeah? And really it's part of a larger pipeline. So for instance, if you took Hali's class at USC, you would learn a lot about the same algorithms we talked about in this class, but in a very different context, which is 3D reconstruction, right? So maybe I put you inside of this giant geodesic dome. I think roughly the one at USC, every one of these nodes of this thing is either a camera or a light. And what they do is they take, and choose to one of those turn on and off, and so you get a photo of a person from all different angles and all different lighting. And then your job is to reconstruct the geometry of their face, and then secondarily to reconstruct the reflections. We're not going to worry about the second half of this nonsense. And there's really neat equipment. I actually got the chance to go inside of that thing, and I got really, really seasick, but I'm told that most actors don't. Anyway, so we're going to start today by talking about a really, really classic algorithm. It's called ICP. I imagine a lot of you guys already have seen this in some context or another. If you haven't, that's okay. And then some of the variants that show up in rigid and non-rigid element. Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have seen ICP in some context? Cool. How many of you have implemented ICP? How many of you managed to get it to converge? Yeah. So some of these things is really easy to try, and then you get really sad really fast at how infrequently it works. Okay. So, as our starting point, we're going to talk about just aligning scans of the bunny where the bunny's a rigid object, right? So I don't have to worry about him bending or, being annoying and moving in front of the camera. He's a static thing that I'm just scanning, right? And so my job is very simple. It's to find a rigid motion that aligns one scan into another. And really that's parameterized by, modulo constraints, 12 numbers, right? A 3x3 rotation matrix, which itself isn't really 12 numbers, it's more like 6. And 5, if you count and a translation vector, yeah? And really, a remarkably large amount of literature goes into essentially approximating these 12 numbers given 2 scans. And it is quite challenging to do that, right? So the one-dimensional picture that we'll use a lot today is I have these 2 curves, these green and these red guys, and I'm trying to find the motion of one guy to the other so they align. They make this happy dotted line. Okay? So first of all, what would be the simplest thing to do would be like to ask Zhao to mark 10 points on one guy, 10 points on the other, and then just solve some system of equations that just finds R and T. So my first question for you is how many correspondences, how many times would you have to click before we just establish R and T exactly, assuming that he has infinitely precise mouse pointer ability. In other words, he's not me. Well, we can come up with an upper bound, right? So we have 12 unknowns, yeah, and with every pair of clicks, well, you effectively get 3 constraints, right? Because you have x, y, and z for each point that has to get mapped from the source to the target. You have 12 unknowns, you get 3 things per click. How many clicks do you need? 4. False, 8, because you got to click the source of the target. But anyway, you need 4 constraints. Essentially, if you want to have a computer system that just given manual clicking align stuff, it's pretty easy to do that. However, you're relying on a few things. One is that some person is really precise about clicking the right features. And that's easier said than done. Like, it's very easy to click on roughly a region on an object. It's very difficult to do precisely the point that aligns, which is what you really need for these, right? And even if you overdetermine and you do least squares, I can tell you from experience, it doesn't tend to work well. So then you might say, well, okay, how do I address this? Well, I can make a computational system that finds features and aligns them automatically, right? And so the next question is, how might I get correspondences? So let's say I have 2 bodies and I want to align them. How can I do that? Actually, you guys have any ideas? I'll stop for a second. How could I find points that align? Because after I align them, it's very easy to solve these squares and find RT. Yeah. All right.
Probably match curvatures.
Match curvatures, that would be an idea. Some other ones. You can do PCA, put them in a common axis, and then kind of find up and sideways. Oh, what was that, Dana?
Kernel signature.
Kernel signature. Yeah, there's a whole zoo of different descriptors. You could try and just, like, for example, you could try to find a descriptor that, like, not only matches from one source to the other, but like matches so well that you're pretty happy and pretty sure. So that's relatively true, but it turns out that all of these things are a little unreliable. And in particular, with the bunny example, what can go wrong is, well, again, I only scan one side of this object, so things like the heat kernel signature aren't going to be enough, and curvature, unfortunately, is only one number, so I probably don't want to match that. So it turns out to be kind of tricky. Yeah? So rather than doing that, the ICP algorithm does the world's stupidest thing instead. And it works surprisingly well, given a good initial guess. So the idea of the ICP algorithm is that maybe I have these 2 geometric objects, and not only do I just assume they're 2 geometric objects, I also assume that somebody's giving me a kind of a rough positioning. Because that much, I'm like kind of okay with asking my user for. Maybe. When we talk about big data, you probably don't want to, but for like 2 models, we're okay with that. Yeah? Well, if they're roughly align with each other, well, then maybe a really simple model for correspondence is you just take the closest point, yeah? So, like, for example, maybe every point on this green guy just finds the closest point on the red guy and says, that's the point that I correspond to because we're roughly in the same place, yeah? Now, notice that these correspondences don't necessarily agree with one another. So, for instance, with the green guy, you see the point on the right, it goes a little, wants to move to the left, these guys want to move to the right, so this is not a rigid motion, yeah? So what do? You find the best rigid motion that kind of sort of agrees with all these as much as it can. And that might give you something on the right-hand side. So this isn't great. But what's the difference between the right-hand side and the left-hand side? Now that closest point trick that I described for you before is a hell of a lot better than it was on the left-hand side. Yeah, so if I do it again, they start aligning even better, right? And now I iterate, and my estimate's even better, and so it's kind of a nice positive feedback loop. Yeah? Incidentally, what do you think happens if these two guys are like initialized to be miles apart and rotated in a funny way? It's totally fast. This only works if you have a good initial alignment. Yeah, this is kind of similar to k-means. Yeah. Right, but in particular, now I start with that thing I have on the right-hand side, and what I get is nice alignment. So in cases where you have nice curvature and a good initial guess, this very classic algorithm, this is called iterative closest point, ICP, not to be confused with the band I liked in middle school, is somewhat very efficient and easy to implement. Yeah? Okay, so in other words, if we summarize it a little bit, maybe I choose 1,000 random points, I match each one with the closest one on the other scan, and then, okay, if you want to make ICP a little better, you say, okay, if my match point is clearly really, really bad, like if it's in this huge distance and everybody else is happy, I throw those away. That's easy to do. So that would be like this medium step here. Then finally, I approximate R and T. Remember, this is the rotation and translation. And now I have a new embedding, so all my closest points have changed, and I iterate. Does basic algorithm make sense? You guys have any questions? Cool. So in fact, the only piece that we're missing for describing ICP is actually the easiest piece, which is the step 4 here, right? Which is I have to give in a bunch of correspondences, so now I know that like PI gets mapped to QI, I need to approximate the rotation and translation that takes one into another. This is a very classic optimization problem, so we'll isolate it here. For fun, does anybody know, at least when you just approximate R and not T, this has a name, dates back to mythology. You guys are no fun. See, people that teach numerical analysis here don't have any fun facts. Yeah, so this is called the Procrustes problem. So this is, I think it's a Greek myth, Latin, Greek, whatever, Roman, where, it's some guy that you would stay in his house and sleep in his bed, and if you're too tall for his bed, he would cut your feet at the end of the bed. And somehow some very perverse mathematician thought, well, we're kind of forcing 2 point clouds in alignment, and apparently in this person's brain these are the same problem. Anyway, if you're curious, that's where this comes from. Regardless, our job is to solve it. Yeah. So let's do that then. So again, we have to approximate 2 things: a rotation and a translation. So first of all, conveniently for us, we actually already did half of this problem in our lecture on k-means, right? In particular, let's say I just optimize this problem with respect to t. Yeah? So in other words, the R, the P's, and the Q's are all constants. Yeah? Then what do we know about t? Do you guys remember this from k-means? It's exactly one of the 2 steps of k-means. Not Orman. Somebody else. Orman. What is t? Okay, so let me write it in a more suggestive way. Let's say I define, give me another letter. U. Thank you. Let's define him to be Qi minus R Pi. So then the problem that we're trying to solve ends up looking like you want to minimize the norm of t minus ui squared over I. What is the solution to this problem? I know you know the answer and you're just being shy. It's the mean. It's the average of the u's. Yeah? Does anybody not see that? Remember we derived it, we differentiated this expression, we set it to 0, that's what we got? Yeah. Well, we did. Okay, so in other words, I can write that t is equal to 1 over, let's say the number of matches I do is n, the sum over I of ui. It kind of makes sense because t, remember, is a barycenter. Yeah, hopefully this language is familiar. Yeah? Okay. So now let's plug in our expression for ui. That's equal to 1 over n, the sum over I, qi minus r pi. Yeah? And I'm going to do a little trick, which is I'm going to kind of push this sum inward. Yeah? So this is 1 over n times the sum of the qi's. Or in other words, this is the average qi. This is the first term. Yeah? So I'm going to notate that as q bar, it's the average q, minus r times the average p. Yeah? This is our expression for t. Where like q bar is 1 over n times the sum of similarly for P. Yeah. Did everybody see how I got that far? Cool. Amazingly, I did this wrong in my notes this morning, and I had like this full-blown identity crisis. You know, all this time I thought I understood percussive problems. Yeah. Oh. Right. So now what's left? I have to. So one thing, by the way, notice that what does this expression imply? It tells me that if I know R, then I just get T for free. So my job is really to find R. Yeah. Okay. So let's take this sum and now plug in our expression for T here. Right. So we have R P I plus T minus QI. Right? And now I'm going to substitute in our expression for T. So this becomes R Pi plus T, which is Q bar minus R P bar minus QI. Right? This is the summand in our objective function. Yeah. And now I'm going to factor it a little bit. So I'm going to say, well, I have these. We have two P's here. Immediately, they're both next to the rotation matrix. We have two Q's that are on their own. Yeah. So this is R minus, let me have QI. You guys see that? So let's just tell me, this tells me if I want to find R, I only care about approximating R, I don't care about approximating T. You know? What can I do? Well, this is just our data set minus its center of mass. Yeah? So essentially, I can compute R without knowing T pretty easily, right? All I have to do is take my data, all these PIs and QIs, and subtract off their average, and then do all of my math on that. Yeah? So, in particular, I'm going to, let's see, do I want to do it like this in my notes? Yeah, I probably should. I'm going to define a matrix capital P, and this is going to be the matrix whose columns are like P1 minus P bar, P2 minus P bar, and so on. Yeah? And similarly, I'll make a matrix Q, which is like Q1 minus Q bar, Q2 minus Q bar, so on. And notice that I don't need T to approximate. So this I can compute from the data. Yeah? So my job is to approximate the rotation matrix R, and in this notation it's pretty nice, right? Because essentially what do I want to do? I want to rotate these things. I want to minimize this difference by rotating one into the other. Yeah? Or so a fancy way of saying that is I want to minimize the Frobenius norm of R times P minus Q. Everybody see that the Frobenius norm is like the sum of the squares of all the elements, like the sum of the square of every column. So R times P is rotating every single P, which remember is really about the center of mass. And then you subtract off Q and you want that difference to be small. Cool? Yeah? Yeah. Only Orion's nodding. Okay. Right, so okay, let's do a little bit of gymnastics on this thing. Well, first of all, so I'm going to remove this little thing on the left and just start writing equal signs. So there are a lot of different ways to write the Frobenius norm, right? And one of them that we've talked about before in this class is that in general, if I have matrix A and I want the Frobenius norm squared, that's the same thing as the trace of A transpose, or A transpose. Yeah? I'm going to assume all of our matrices the dimensionality works out. Okay. So in particular, this thing is equal to the trace of RP minus Q times R transpose times RP minus Q. Yeah? And now what are we going to do? We're going to expand the square. Yeah? Which is going to be painful. So, or we're going to, is it foil first? Yeah, okay. So you get P transpose R transpose RP. But remember, R transpose R is the identity. So you get trace of P transpose P. That's this pair. And then you have minus P transpose R transpose Q minus Q transpose RP plus Q transpose Q. Did I do that right? Cool. Alright, so first of all, for purposes of our optimization problem, does this term or that term matter? No, right? Because I only care about R, and trace is a linear function. Yeah? Okay, so here's a nice one final trick. Remember that the trace of a matrix is equal to the trace of its transpose, and that trace of A times B is equal to the trace of B times A. So I can like cycle stuff around as much as I want, I can transpose, I can go crazy with basically all the algebra that I wish were true in general happens to be true inside of trace. Yeah? So in particular, what can I do? To match with the notes that I have here, I can cycle this and get trace of, I'm going to cycle to the left, so I get R transpose Q P transpose. You guys see that? It's a minus in front. And here, I'm going to transpose and move the R to the left again. So you get R transpose Q, which is transpose, transpose, P transpose again. Yeah, so this is all from just transposing and cycling as much as you want. What do we notice? These are the same thing, yeah? Okay, so at the end of the day, our Reconstruction problem here could be written in two different ways. It can be written like this, which is kind of like saying approximate RP minus Q, make that small. Or I want to minimize minus something. Or in other words, I want to maximize the trace of R transpose Q P transpose. And this is over R transpose R equals identity. Yeah? Are you with me so far? So somehow you see that life is like slowly getting better. Like I had a quadratic objective function and now it's linear because I kind of killed all the quadratic terms. Yeah? So we're almost there. Anybody have ideas for what we're going to do next? Like in linear algebra, whenever I see a rotation matrix, what's screaming out and crying for help? What wants me to do? Especially 3x3 matrices. They're small. Like what's the only trick we know how to do in linear algebra or linear inverted matrix and eigenvalue? SVD. Yeah, don't all say it at once now. So, you guys all remember what the singular value decomposition of a matrix is? So essentially, I can take, remember the QP transpose. How big is that matrix, by the way? So Q, remember the columns of Q are data points. Yeah, so it's 3 by something times a matrix transpose, which is also 3 by something. So this whole thing is 3 by 3. Yeah? So if I compute the SVD of QP transpose, then I can factor that as U sigma V transpose, where these two are orthogonal and this guy is diagonal with positive elements down the diagonal. That sound familiar? Cool. Alright, so why do we want to do that? Well, it's going to be a really nice trick. This is a nice proof. I like this thing. Which means I'll probably get wrong. Right, so we have trace of R transpose Q P transpose. That's what we had before. Now I'm going to sub in the SVD, so I get trace of R transpose U sigma V transpose. Yeah. Remember, I can just like keep cycling stuff around as much as I want to trace. It's like our favorite trick. So now I'm going to say that this is equal to trace of V transpose R transpose U sigma. Cool? And I'm going to group it like that. I'm going to call this thing R bar. Yeah? In fact, we'll call it R bar transpose for consistency. So why do I do that? Well, what is R bar? For one thing, do you guys see that if R is an orthogonal matrix, then R bar had better be orthogonal as well, right? Because it's a product of 3 orthogonal guys. So in a sense, for every R, there's an R bar. This language is really bad. For every R bar, there's an R. You guys see that? So I can write this problem in a completely equivalent way by saying, okay, well now, what do I want to do? I want to maximize R bar transpose R bar equals I, trace R transpose times sigma. Yeah? what is this thing? Well, remember that sigma here, sigma looks like this. Right? And then all these three numbers are positive. We'll assume that this is a full rank matrix. That usually happens. Then what is this thing? This is equal to the sum of r bar I times sigma I. Yeah? And remember that I want to maximize this number over all possible rotation matrices. Yeah? Now, what is the biggest element I can have, like the biggest number I can possibly see in a rotation matrix? What, like any single element, r sub I, ij, what is the biggest number I can see? It's 1, right? Because the norm of the column, of every column of a rotation matrix is 1. Yeah? So the biggest possible value I could have for this objective function is sigma 1 plus sigma 2 plus sigma 3. Right? Because I'm just going to add all three of those guys together, and I know the coefficient can never be bigger than 1. You see that? Nice trick. So, can I actually realize that? What matrix has r sub I equal to 1 and is orthogonal? Eric, what matrix has r equal to 1 and is orthogonal?
The identity matrix.
Exactly, identity matrix. So, what I just argued to you is that r bar is equal to the identity. But remember, we defined that thing to be equal to U transpose RV. Yeah? So in other words, R is equal to, remember the inverse of an orthogonal matrix is transpose? So it's U V transpose. Yeah. Where U and V come from the singular value of P and Q, and P and Q are the matrices we subtract off. Okay, there. Alright, so does anybody have any questions about this derivation? So at the end of the day, your algorithm is very simple, right? What you do for iterative closest point, you choose your closest points, and then you need to find T and you need to find R, right? So how do you find R? You compute this matrix, QP transpose, you do as SVD, but that's just a 3 by 3 matrix, so SVD is basically free. And you just read off a formula here. And then, for your next trick, you compute the translation vector, but that's nothing more than this formula here, which now you can do because you have R. Cool? So that's the full, now you have everything you need to go home and implement iterative closest point on your laptop. And if we had another homework in this class, which I'm sure you're all glad that we don't, that would be the first thing I'd ask you to do. Right? So, right. So at the end of the day, really the only ingredients you need for ICP are very simple, right? You just need to choose closest points. So in other words, for every point you just iterate over the other surface and find the guy that's closest. We'll return to that in a moment. And then, once you've meshed up all your closest points, you solve this least squares problem, but that's equal to, you know, subtract off the mean, compute to a 3 by 3 matrix, take its SVD, and you're basically done. Yeah? So this is very fast algorithm. Any questions?
Anybody use this in dimension higher than 3?
Yes.
Like it should work.
Yeah, it works in any dimension. It gets worse, however. ICP it scales poorly with dimension for 2 reasons. One is you have to solve closest point, which you're probably not going to want to do by iterating over your whole data set. Come back to that in a second. And the other more subtle one is sensitivity to your initial guess, which can get worse because there's sort of more ways to be misaligned the higher your dimension is. But it does appear sometimes. So for example, in this functional amounts paper that we have a couple weeks ago, we did ICP in Laplace-Beltrami's spectrum space, which I don't recommend. Other people replace that later, as they should. Okay. So I would say in the 90s in computer graphics literature and geometry, there's this little cottage industry of coming up with like all kinds of cool variants of ICP. Because this is a very simple algorithm and it's very modular, right? You have this closest point step, and you have this estimation step, and you have a feature step. A lot of different things you can kind of replace, see if your replacement is better, you're going to write a paper about it, and life is good. And I tease these people, and really that's what they should have been doing, right? I mean, this is an algorithm that kind of looks promising, but needs some help, right? So examples could be, you know, being a little bit more intelligent about how you choose your matching points, right? Like, can you make ICP symmetric? The way that I described for you, it's not really symmetric, right? Every source point chooses a target. You might have every target choose a source. It's a very easy variant. You could weight this objective function here, so that somehow if you're very confident that you have a good match, you should use that. You should pay more money if you violate it using T and R. You could try and remove outliers like bad matches that you're pretty sure are not so good, or you could even just throw the whole table upside down and replace your objective function and optimize something else. So for instance, maybe you don't like least squares because you do expect there to be a lot of outliers, so you just kind of erase that square and you think it's like an L1 problem, so you expect some things to just be incorrect. Right, so there's some classical ones that are worth being aware of. One of the simplest ones, and I don't think it's worth going through the math here. Essentially, a big issue with ICP is that typically you're aligning pretty sparsely sampled pieces of geometry. And what that means is when in general, when you choose your closest point, I hope you guys know this geometrically, if you take two objects and you choose the closest point from one onto another, it necessarily lies on the tangent plane of the other guy. You can see that in this picture here. You see how this line, which is the line of the closest points, are orthogonal to the tangent. That's not a mistake. That won't happen if you just choose the closest vertex, right? Because then you somehow ignore tangent planes. You're just choosing from some discrete set. So one reasonable extension is that well, maybe if I'm aligning triangle measures, I have some approximation of the normal. I have some idea of tangent plane. So what I'm going to do is when I solve this least squares problem, I'm only going to punish motion that is orthogonal to the tangent plane. I don't care if the surface slides because somehow I can't detect that anyway. Right? So that leads to a slightly different linear least squares problem than the one we wrote down here. It's no easier. Another thing is that this closest point step is really suspect, right? I mean, the whole point of ICP is to align stuff, and somehow the assumption when you choose your closest point for your alignment is that you're aligned, right? This is totally circular logic, and you should be suspicious of that, right? And so essentially, ICP algorithm kind of counts on the fact that the mistakes that you make when you choose your closest point kind of destructively interfere, right? That you have just as many that choose their closest point to the left as to the right, and somehow that averages out to an okay alignment. But that's a fishy thing, right? So there are lots of different tricks for proving this. For instance, you could, maybe if you have a range scanner, you not only get a geometry, you also get color. So a reasonable thing would be to throw out points that are matched but don't have the same color, or you want their normal vectors to align, or as Orion suggested, maybe you match their curvatures, or as I think Danielle suggested, you match their heat concentrations. Essentially, any variation of this you can think of somebody that's proposed. One kind of interesting one, I thought, so essentially what I've done is just kind of grabbed a few of these variations that I think are kind of interesting. One of the ones that makes a lot of sense is that ICP, as I've described it, where you just kind of randomly chooses points to correspond, but there's some points whose correspondence is more useful than others. Do you see that? So for instance, if I have two planar surfaces and I try to align them, I can't, right? Because they can slide along each other and the geometry just doesn't change. So you somehow don't expect to do very well when you don't have curvature, right? So a very simple thing to do would be simply to bias your sampling so that you tend in your closest point procedure to use closest points of points with more curvature, because those ones tend to match in a more stable way. Okay? In fact, what some folks have done is come up with all kinds of different measures of covariance. So you choose a point, you choose its neighbors, and you look at how similar or different are they, right? So they're all sitting on the same plane, that the covariance is pretty flat in one direction and nice evenly spaced in different ones. So these guys have worked out all the different pictures. So here if you have three small eigenvalues from a plane, maybe you get a one-dimensional structure like this guy on the right. You do this just by computing the variance of the plane as neighbors. Yeah? And you can use that to kind of bias where you choose points for ICP. So here, what we've done is colored the bunny based on the stability that you expect. And as you might be able to tell, when you do ICP, typically the points you want to grab onto are the interesting features, right? Like tips of the ears and the folds and so on. Because think about how you would align two surfaces in real life, right? You would kind of click them together. You wouldn't slide them until they kind of glue into place, right? That would be great. This is particularly important if you're aligning clay tablets, which actually is an application here, because that's a really great example where ICP and all these alignment algorithms are likely to fail, and you really need good alignment, right? So let's say that I'm scanning the Rosetta Stone, and I have two scans because I don't know if you've ever been to the British Museum. It's a big stone, and the problem here, I have the cuneiform. Is that what you call the letters on the side of the Rosetta Stone? And I need those to line up perfectly in order for those divots to line up in my 3D model, right? And even if I ask somebody to click those feature points, they probably aren't going to align just right to get all the letters to be perfect. If you guys have ever played with transparencies on a projector, you know it's really trying to get that to work. I guess you guys probably have one here. But that aside, one thing you can do is kind of bias your sampling to places where your normal changes. Or in fact, in computer graphics, maybe you have a normal map, like a normal vector per texture point. You can do a very high frequency alignment that way. Okay, so I have, anyway, this is I promise, the end of our sampling of random ICP algorithms. You could do this for days. In fact, I noticed a couple years ago in your graphics that whole course on variants of the ICP technique for different types of data. My question for you, though, is what is the bottleneck of this algorithm? Like, what would make it fast or slow? Any ideas? A couple different steps. It's always the same two people. Like if my ICP code is taking a long time, right? It's taking a lot of CPU cycles. What's taking all the time? Yes, Rafael.
Maybe multiplying Q and P.
So that's one thing. So that's an iteration over your entire data set. So how, in kind of computer science terms, if you have endpoints, then you expect them to be order n time. But remember, each point had to choose what in order to construct that matrix? Yeah, it had to choose its closest point, right? So for every one of the n guys, each one of him had to iterate over all n guys on the other guy. In other words, you have n squared time to compute all the pairs of closest points. Okay? And that's actually the bottleneck. It's a little subtle. So somehow it looks like this should be the bottleneck because somehow this smells like computation. It's got matrices in it. But actually, that's the fast part. It's only a 3x3 matrix after we go through all these equations. Yeah? So a big point of study in the world of ICP is all about how can I find my nearest neighbor as quickly as possible. Yeah? And there's all kinds of algorithms for that. And those sort of computer graphics are very used to studying this in different contexts, right? So a very simple one here would be a BSP, I guess binary space partition tree, right? Those of you who took our class last semester in graphics have seen this before. Where essentially you have some giant cloud of data points, and what I'm going to do is just slice it in half, right? I'm going to make a data set that keeps slicing my data in half, just like in a tree structure, until I isolate a few points, and then I'll just store it in the list, right? And why does this help closest point? Well, roughly, if I'm like in the upper right quadrant here, then I expect to be far away from the lower left, and then somehow this culls out large chunks of points at a time on my nearest neighbor query. Yeah? So for instance here, let's say that I choose this red point, and his nearest neighbor is this guy over here, and so I traverse this tree where A is the full space, C is just the right-hand side, and then F is the top, right? So I can do this traversal of the tree, and light is good. Does anybody see a problem with what I've proposed for you here? I want to do iterative closest point. I just keep checking which side of the partition I'm on and going that side of the tree. Yeah, Jared.
Point's not being on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. So in particular, check out this red point here, right? So he's a really pesky guy, right? Because essentially, what happens here? Well, if he wants to choose the closest point and he's restricted to the quadrant that he's in our binary space partition, he's going to ignore the fact that just by dumb luck, on the other side of the partition, right on the other side of the wall, it's so close and so far away, is this other point that he doesn't see if he only traverses the tree. Right? So we have to be very careful about that. Yeah, so typically, when you implement this algorithm, you really do have to check two possibilities. They're on either side of the wall. Yeah? So the typical way that you implement traversal of a binary space partition tree is kind of conservative. What you do is you go all the way down the tree until you find some match. And now you can say, well, I have the distance to that match. It might not be the closest one, but now I know that any partition of this tree where the entire partition is that distance away, I can ignore. Right? So then I can start to call stuff out. But all this is a warning. You can't just do our usual traversal of a binary tree where you just go down once. That'll actually fail. So you have to be quite careful how you implement this stuff. I've given you pseudocode here. Roughly it doesn't really matter, but the point here is you choose the distance. And then only if you're 100,000% confident that any point in the other side of the subtree is worse than what you already have, do you not traverse it. Right? That's the basic trick here. One variation of this that you might have heard of is something called a KD tree. The difference between a KD tree and a BSP tree is that KD tree you align the divisions with one of the coordinate axes. This is kind of nice for constructing the tree. It makes your life a little easier. But of course, so you know, where I'm from, we say you can put lipstick on a pig, but you know we can make ICP algorithm faster, but it doesn't mean the result is any better. Yeah, and so speed aside, the question you should ask is this algorithm more successful? And unfortunately, as usual, I've managed to answer the question before I've posted. Right? In fact, this algorithm really depends on your initial guess. And if you start with a bad alignment and you choose your closest point, that's not going to be a great way to improve your alignment, right? Because the closest point has nothing to do with alignment. Yeah? In fact, there's some really slick diagrams that illustrate this in a nice way. So here, what they've done is they've placed the bunny at different points on the plane, and they've kind of rotated it radially from the center. Do you see that? So for every point here, you can think of this like a bunny that's rotated orthogonal to this red line. And then what they did is on each of these little white circles, you illustrate for what initial rotation of the bunny does ICP converge, and for what initial rotation does it not. Right? So you translate the bunny and you rotate it, and then you check whether it gives you the answer you're looking for. Yeah? And the diagram is really quite depressing. That really, in a relatively like less than half of the sliver for every one of these things, you get the correspondence you want. So roughly, this algorithm, I mean, what can you read from this diagram? That somehow it's very sensitive to your initial rotation and not very sensitive to your initial translation, right? All these guys are all kind of pointing to the right, but the failure space is quite large, right? So if you implement vanilla ICP and it fails, you shouldn't feel bad for yourself. You should feel annoyed with the computer scientists that came up with it. There are lots of variations of ICP, and essentially whenever you propose one, if you're a good moral human being, you should generate the same diagram and double check when your algorithm is better, right? Because this really quickly tells you whether your algorithm is doing well or not, right? So for instance, in this point to plane distance where like I'm okay with slippage, the convergence becomes really strange. I don't know if that's better or worse. I mean, there's certain points at the bottom for which it just never converges, whereas other ones, it covers the whole thing, so I don't really see a great pattern. This is all to say that you can come up with all kinds of reasonable looking variations of this problem. It is very difficult to formulate one that really does what you want. That's because fundamentally it's a non-convex problem. Yeah? Now another problem that's going to keep coming up in the remaining weeks of this class is one of consistency. Right? So far, the ICP algorithm that I've described for you involves what? It involves two meshes. And the question is, let's say that I do ICP and I align mesh 1 to mesh 2. Now I do ICP again, I align mesh 2 to mesh 3. So now they're all in the same coordinate system, and I look at them all on top of each other. What do you think happens as I add more and more meshes to the pile here? There's a term for this, it's called drift. Right? The more things you align to the last guy, the worse it gets because you're accumulating error every time you do that. Right? And so there's an interesting question here, which is, if I'm given a whole pile of 3D models, can I align them all at the same time? Can I co-align them? That's what we typically say. A different way of seeing that is, you know, roughly what ICP gives you is a map from one object into the other, and if you compose all of those maps, what you expect is to get the identity, but you might not, right? There's nothing about that algorithm that guarantees that that'll happen. Right? And so typically when we have more than two scans, what we really have to worry about is drift. So for instance here, we ran ICP on this little collection of line segments, and what ends up happening, you can kind of see that pairwise, you can even kind of guess which order we did to align these things. You can see that pairwise it looks okay, but because of slippage and other issues, somehow the radius of curvature is incorrect here, and it doesn't close up a new circle. Okay? In robotics, this shows up a lot too. Does anybody know the name of the algorithm in robotics people typically use for this problem? So like, my robot is walking around and scanning a hallway, but the hallway makes a loop. But unfortunately, when I made that loop, my map that I was building didn't quite match up, and now I have to do something to fix it. Find Orion. SLAM. Yeah. Anybody know what SLAM stands for?
Simultaneous localization map.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, this is another example where somehow you accumulate error if you do pairwise stuff, and then all of a sudden you notice you made a full loop, but you didn't end up where you started, and you have to do something to fix that. Yeah. So there are all kinds of simple methods that can improve, at least on that naive algorithm, right? The simplest one is like, okay, rather than align model 1 to model 2, model 3 to model 2 to model 3, model 3 to model 4, at the very least, I might as well align everybody to model 1, and then I don't have drift, I just have a lot of error. But you know, somehow if I chose model 1 poorly, like that was the bad scan, then I'm hosed from the start. Yeah? Or maybe what I do is I align model 1 to model 2, and I take the union of those two things, and I make model 2.5, and I align model 3 to that union, and I keep doing that. That's another one people might do. That one's a little bit of a challenge because it depends on the order that you happen to traverse your set of models, and the speed gets worse, right? With every model you add to your like weird trash ball of a model, you now have to go, closest point becomes more challenging. Or maybe you do ICP between every single pair of meshes at a time, and somehow try to co-align them all into one coordinate axis all simultaneously. As you can imagine, the computational expense there it grows exponentially. It's not so good. So one kind of typical method people will do is they'll say, okay, well we have all these shape descriptors, we have some reasonable way of understanding how similar two models are, so maybe what I do is I say, okay, for two models that are similar enough, I expect to do okay aligning them. So I do an ICP just between those pairs, and now between any pair, my job, I have some co-alignment of those two things, and now I just average all those co-alignments to get a global coordinate system. Yeah? So an example of this was proposed by Liu and Milios? I don't know, never met the guy. Where essentially they have two phases, right? The first phase is any two models that are sufficiently similar, I just do vanilla ICP and align them. And then I solve a least squares problem just like this to essentially just average all those different coordinate systems into one. Yeah? The problem is if you average a bunch of rotation matrices, what do you get? You don't get a rotation matrix. You get some other thing. And so typically this works okay. But if you have one bad edge in that graph where somehow your ICP has failed, then you get into trouble. Yeah? So really, what you have at the most abstract level is a problem that actually shows up a lot in modern applied mathematics, so of course I love it. And this is a problem by the name of synchronization. So the basic idea here is, what is ICP, like if I just have that ICP algorithm, what does it give me? It gives me for any pair of models some rough alignment from one to the other, right? So for any n objects, I have n squared rough relationship between the pairs, but they all disagree with each other. My job is to make them agree, right? In other words, I want to synchronize them. Yeah? It turns out that synchronization on SE3, like taking a bunch of pairwise rotations, putting them all into a coordinate system, is an open problem. We don't actually know how to solve this to optimality. That's not to say that it's going to be hard, it's to say that we just don't know how to solve it. So a simpler version of this problem is something we call angular synchronization. So here, I'm going to do it in 2 dimensions, and I'm going to ignore t. So here, I've got a bunch of different rotations of a 2D object, and between every pair, I have some rough estimate of the rotation, and I'm going to put them all in one coordinate system. By the way, notice I can only get that coordinate system up to a global rotation, right? Because yeah. So in other words, given a bunch of estimates of theta I minus theta j modulo 2 pi for a bunch of pairs of angles, my question is, can I extract just an estimate of all the theta i's? You guys have any ideas how I can solve this problem? So first of all, there's sort of 2 issues. One is that I have n squared things, I want to make them into n things. The other, which is actually the nastier, more evil problem, is that I only know angles up to 2 pi, so I can't do least squares. They circularly communicate with each other. So first of all, how can I get rid of the second issue? Let's say I have theta 1 and theta 2, and they're actually the same up to modulo 2 pi. What number is actually the same for both of those? It's e to the I theta 1 and e to the I theta 2. So what's going to end up happening in this world is we're going to convert this problem into a complex number problem, so synchronization there, and then extract out the angles by taking complex log. So anyway, I thought for fun, I mean this is a problem that's slightly outside of the usual ICP world, but it's a good kind of indicator of how hard this stuff is. That what you'd really like to solve is given pairwise estimate of rigid motion from ICP, put them all in the same coordinate system. Here I have put it in 2D and gotten rid of translation. It's already a very difficult problem. So I think rather than start that now, because it's going to require a little bit of math, we'll do that at the very beginning of next lecture and derive some kind of reasonable convex relaxations of this problem and show how you can estimate these angles and then show that even those problems are really, really challenging. Just as kind of a suggestion of something that's fun for you guys to go home and think about, like a lot of grad students and stuff. Cool. So I think, yeah, rather than going crazy with this stuff, we'll stop here and we'll start with it on Thursday. If you haven't started your homework, please do. Please, from the bottom of my heart. Don't make me hold last minute office hours. And really, I'm excited to see some good progress on your project. So somebody can hit the button on the camera but not close it or unplug it.